I face death every day, yes, just as surely as I boast about you in Christ, Jesus our Lord. If I have fought wild beasts and Ephesus with no more than human hopes, what have I gained if the deaf are not raised? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Come back to your senses as you ought, and stop sinning, for there are some who are ignorant of God. I say this in your shame.
Well, this is our second lesson in a series on the book of Proverbs that I'm calling The Road to Life. Over and over again in the book of Proverbs, we're invited to choose a good path. And there are many paths available to us. And sometimes the good path is the one that's more difficult, but it's also the one that in the end leads to the most possible blessing and peace for us in our life. As part of this, we've been inviting people to participate in something we're calling the Character Challenge. That's another thing that's an insert in your bulletin for this week. We have a few selected passages that have been picked out, along with some discussion questions, and you can go to that URL, kingscrossingcoc.com/character, if you'd like to sign up. I think right now I've got about 130 of you on my email list, so appreciate your participation in that. But for this last week, we spent some time reflecting on companionship. And truly, life is hardly worth living if we have no one with whom we can share the experiences of it. That's certainly inclusive of the good times and the best memories that we have together, but that's also true of the times that are more difficult, that when things are difficult, we're better when we don't have to go through those things on our own. Everyone wants to belong somewhere. Don't you think that's true? Everybody wants to feel like they belong somewhere. And there's a lot of different ways that we try and identify who it is that we belong with, right? I mean, we have certain places we tend to go at certain times, and whether it's sports teams, jerseys, and hats and things that we wear, or just the way that we dress from day to day, we're trying to identify ourselves with perhaps a certain kind of people or a certain group of people with whom we feel like we share things in common. Now, there's a lot of ways that that sense of companionship can produce very positive things in our life, to have good influences, but just the same, that can also take a negative twist, can't it? If we get associated with people who are going to ultimately bring us down to a place that we wouldn't want to go. The passage that we're going to look at this morning in Proverbs, I just don't think I could read it without being reminded of the problems with gangs that exist in the world. Just looking at some basic statistics, I was pleased to see that gang involvement as a whole is actually these days on the decline. It's less than it was a few years ago. But if I were to ask you about some of the things you would expect about gangs to be true, some of these statistics I'll share with you, I think you would say they're sad, but perhaps not surprising. So for example, when would you expect a person to get involved with a violent group of young people? Why, most often it's people who are in their teenage years, isn't it? 90% of gang members get started when they're teenagers. It's something people are susceptible to earlier in life, when they're looking for someone to accept them, for a place to belong. Probably not surprising to learn that 75% of gang members are between the ages of 12 and 25. So you would expect, again, this is kind of something that young people can get caught up in. One thing I was surprised by is that about a third of that number is female. For people who are actively involved in gangs, about a third of them are female. But this third statistic is the one that hit me pretty hard, that at whatever point a person joins a gang, their life expectancy goes to 5 years. From whatever point they get involved with that way of life, they're not expected to live about more than 5 years, usually because of some kind of gang-related violence that occurs. Our passage in Proverbs today is an encouragement to everyone to stay away from violent people, stay away from people who are trying to go after dishonest gain. In the mind of Proverbs, violence and theft, these are forms of laziness. It's the height of laziness because these are people who were trying to have something that they were unwilling to work for, trying to receive something that they were unwilling to earn. And at this point in Proverbs, this is one passage that ends up sounding a bit more like prophecy than the rest of the book, because there are some promises that start coming along with this passage that, if you choose wisely and you stay away from this, you're going to be blessed. Your parents' teachings are going to enhance your life. But if you give in to this, just like those statistics would say, if you start following down that path, things are not going to end well. It's a bit prophetic in how it describes the problem. So something that begins to happen in this passage that we're going to see in most of the passages we look at in Proverbs, this passage takes on a very parental tone. What we have here are sort of an idealized mother and father figure who are talking to their child about how to live a good life. And some of the admonitions we're going to get in this passage are how important it is that you listen to your mother and listen to your father. Now, I have to say, I've been in full-time church work for coming up on around 15 years now. And one of the things that I've learned can be hard about passages like this is that for people like myself who grew up with both parents at home and godly grandparents, when I hear admonitions to listen to my mother and my father's teaching, that clicks really easily with me. I'm aware that I'm speaking to some people right now that when you think of mom or of dad, for you, that might not be a happy image. That might be something that's a little harder to accept. And maybe when you read passages like this, you think, well, maybe listening to my dad or listening to my mom, that sounds like the last thing I would have wanted to do in my life. So on the one hand, I just have to say, kind of from a pastoral angle, I can't immediately just fix that or make that go away in your life. And if you're not a person who benefited from parents who tried to lead you towards godliness, I'm sorry you went through that experience. What I hope can happen is that to some extent, what we see here in Proverbs and in Scripture can redeem for you the idea of what good parents can be like. That with God's help, we can be older people who provide a great role model, great encouragement to the younger people in our lives. So let's begin. In Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8, it says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, 'Come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood, let's ambush some harmless soul, let's swallow them alive like the grave, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will all share the loot. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. How useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it." It's speaking of violent youth. I think, again, it's an easy connection to make to gang membership and that type of thing. But there at the end, you notice this is really not just true of people caught up in gang violence and crime. This is anyone who's looking for a way to make a dishonest buck. Anybody who's trying to work around the path of hard work or honesty or integrity just to get ahead by some other means. This is what becomes true for people who do such a thing. So, important lesson for life: just because someone invites you to go along with them doesn't mean that you necessarily should, right? There are people who will invite you to cast your lot with them, to do things with you, and just because they say, "Come and join me," you really ought to think about whose invitation you're receiving and whether it's worth following up on that invitation. Now, as we've already talked about, one of the challenges in life is that it really does feel so good to be accepted and to feel wanted, at least in some circle. But there can be blessings or terrible consequences that go with acceptance and becoming part of a group of people. Good friends can carry you through hardships and help you to live better, but crooked friends might also stick with you. But ultimately, they could bring you down in the end. And you go through different phases of this in life. Sometimes when you're younger and innocent, perhaps a bit naive, you have people who will try to take advantage of you and say, well, you should come do this with us or be part of this. And it's a get-rich-quick scheme or it's something else. And if you just go ahead and join with us, it's just like the things they were saying in Proverbs. Oh, your purse is going to be full of money. You're going to have everything you want. Everything's going to be great. But just trust us and go with us. Something that you may experience later in life, I get a lot of random phone calls. When you're a minister of a church, there are all kinds of businesses, charities, everyone else who has a tendency to call up church leaders and try to talk. I mean, they're using all these sales techniques about, if you would just let us have a list of all of your church members, the things we would love to do to help them in their life. Wouldn't you like this to be true for all of your church members? And again, I systematically decline vast majority of those invitations. Sometimes people are looking to take advantage of you because of what they think they can get through your connections. It's worth thinking about the people that you choose to surround yourself with. All throughout youth ministry, there was a quote I had come across that I'd used a lot of times where I would tell young people, you should expect that you're going to be an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Have y'all heard that one before? You're probably going to be an average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So in terms of what they think is valuable, what they do, you're probably going to become like them. So as I was thinking about that, I did a little bit of digging, and I discovered that that's actually way too small of a number to be thinking about. And in fact, that's way too limiting of a mindset when you're understanding the way that people have influence over you. There's a famous study called the Framing Ttan Heart Study. This began in 1948. The purpose of this study was to look at the problem of heart disease, which is, a major killer in our country, and they were trying to understand what is it that leads to problems with heart disease, heart failure, and so they got this huge sample group of people, and they started looking at all kinds of aspects of their life. And this is part of what has made this study so useful in a lot of areas, because even though they were studying the effects of heart disease, they started asking them questions about all kinds of random things in their life, just looking for any sort of correlation between what a person does and whether or not they develop problems with their heart. And so this started in 1948, and they have not only included the original people from the study, at this point they've included children and then also grandchildren, and they've continued tracking all of these people who were connected. At this point, there are more than 14,000 people they've been tracking closely ever since 1948, over generations, looking partially at heart disease, but they've started looking at other things as well. So all the data is there to analyze, and so people started looking for other common factors, and the social component is a really surprising one. They started out by studying obesity, which is one that could have a definite tie to heart disease. Did you realize that if a good friend of yours becomes obese, you have a 45% chance of gaining weight over the next 2 to 4 years? Interestingly, just by being friends with someone. More surprising is that if a friend of a friend, so your friend's friend, someone that you don't even know, has a lot of weight gain, you're in fact 20% more likely to gain weight, even if you don't know that person who is a friend of your friend. They would say something very similar about smoking, for example. If you have a best friend who smokes, you're 61% more likely to be a smoker yourself. And again, if you go to the friend of a friend, still 29% more likely to do that. So to the question, are you affected by your friends and your relationships? Absolutely. But the surprising part is that it doesn't really just stop with the people you know. It's even the people that they associate with that also have an impact on you and your life. So on a positive note, the same research also concluded that if you have a friend who says they're really happy with their life, yes, you're probably more likely to be a happier person. But the really amazing statistic was, follow with me, it was a friend of a friend of a friend, okay? So not someone that you know or even your friend knows, but that person's friend. If you have someone that far away, a friend of a friend of a friend, who says they're really happy with their life, that increases the likelihood of you feeling happy with your life by 6%. 6% doesn't sound like very much, but there's another bit of research that has shown that if today I were able to tell you that you got a $10,000 a year raise in your job, that would only increase your happiness by 2%. So think about that. Just the power of a friend of a friend of a friend who is a really happy, optimistic person can impact your life even more than if someone handed you $10,000 extra this year. So I bring all those things up and I invite us to think about the importance of who it is that we surround ourselves with. Who do I associate with? Who do they associate with? But doesn't this also invite us to think about our own influence and the kind of presence that we are in people's lives? So whether you're always pessimistic, if you're always complaining, if you're always negative, what kind of repercussions is that having not just on the people you know, but even on the people you don't know that they happen to be connected to? And on the positive side of that, if we're living as people of God, if we are living out of a place of hope and optimism and courage and bring positivity with us into the things that we do, what a powerful difference we can make in the lives, even of people that we've never met, because of our presence and the way that we do things. So important for us to continue, as Mike invited us to this morning, coming together, getting to know each other, worshiping together, sharing in common purposes, doing work together for good. In this passage in Proverbs, there's a pretty clear piece of advice for young people, isn't there? Be wise, listen to wise people, be careful the people that you choose to associate with. I really love this quote. It's attributed to Abraham Lincoln. It says, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Have you heard that before? I had not heard that one before. That's pretty wise, isn't it? Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'm going to spend at least the first 4 of those sharpening the axe. So what is it that we need to be doing in our life, especially when we're younger? We need to surround ourselves with people who would help sharpen us. That's also a kind of a biblical reference, isn't it? The idea that the way that an iron can sharpen another iron, people sharpen people. So we have to think about the people that we're including around us, making sure that they're going to lead to our sharpening. So when you reflect on yourself, when I've had a time that was difficult, who are the people that helped me to be more courageous? What is it that I was doing in my life that helped me to bounce back from that adversity? What is it that helped me to be stronger and able to withstand things that were difficult for me? Those are the things that help to sharpen us, that we need to make time for, that we need to surround ourselves with. And truly, there are a lot of possible companions out there who might make great promises, just like Proverbs talks about. Oh, no, you ought to join in with us. The loot's going to be great. We're going to get away with it. No one's ever going to know. But if you share your lot with crooked people, you also share in the consequences that they one day experience. A thing that I loved about this passage in Proverbs is that it speaks a bit to the wisdom of animals. Now, he's talking specifically about birds. I have a cat at home. And I don't know if you have the same experience, but I try on the mornings that I have to take her to the vet, I try to change absolutely nothing about my routine. I feed her, I do all the same things the way that I normally would, but somehow she just knows it every time, right? That morning, she doesn't want to come eat. She's hiding under one of our cars. It usually is like a 2-person effort, one of us to either scare her or tempt her with treats, and the other trying to grab her when she's not looking and then to cram her in that cage. But I don't have to say anything about a vet, and she just somehow senses that it's coming. But in this passage, it talks about the way that birds are, the way that a bird, if you leave a net to catch a bird, that's the illusion they're going with. If you're trying to trap a bird and you leave that net out in plain sight, a bird is not going to go anywhere near that net. What is it that's so different about human beings who choose to be foolish, that we would actively choose to run towards the very things that are going to do us harm? Why is it that human beings will continue running with a crowd of people who are going nowhere and are going to take you with them? For some reason, animals get it, but we don't often get it. I think the writer of Proverbs here would probably say to call such a person bird-brained would be an insult to the birds, because a bird wouldn't do that. They wouldn't keep running towards the net. They wouldn't keep running towards the trap. But yet, our temptation is to get associated with people who bring us down and then to hang on to that, even to our great detriment. So again, there's a message here to younger people to listen well, be careful who you choose for your companions. Don't just go running into things that ultimately could do you harm. But isn't there also here a message for the older people in the conversation? Because in the passage, we have the younger person who's receiving instruction, but what we also have is an older person who cares enough to talk to that younger person. found a great quote a couple of days ago. One of my friends had tweeted this. It says, in a study of resilient children, so people who can bounce back from stuff. When you find kids who go through something hard and just are able to still perform well in life and overcome, it says, kids who transcended difficult circumstances had one common factor, and this was non-exploitive adults who walked alongside them as advocates, encouragers, and supporters. That was the one common factor that every case, the kids who were resilient, they had older people in their life who cared about them and walked beside them. This is something that I know Justin was talking about a little bit last week. We mentioned the importance of intergenerational friendships in the church, that you don't need to only be friends with people your age, but you need some friends who are older than you so that you can imagine what is it like to be an older person who's faithful to God. What are the struggles today of a younger person who's trying to walk in Christ's footsteps? But these important roles of having someone in your life who will be an advocate for you. Have you had any good advocates in your life? I know I have. Someone who would say, well, they're not there yet, but go ahead and give them a chance. I bet if we gave them an opportunity, go ahead and let them try, and even if it doesn't go well, they'll be closer to getting it right because we gave them that space. We need people who advocate for us. We need people who encourage us when we feel too afraid to do the thing that we ought to do. If you've got companions, even if they're bad companions, it can be really hard to pull yourself away from such people because they're at least familiar to you. It's hard to let go of things that are familiar, but we need people who offer us encouragement and then support as we do the right thing, that they're not going to let us fall and stumble and then just abandon us. What a difference it makes in the lives of younger people to have those who are older and wiser who walk beside them as advocates, encouragers, and supporters. So if you have a young person in your life, ultimately they do make their own decisions, don't they? We can't control what people do, but let's not let that be because we didn't make the effort to teach them the right path. It isn't just good enough to say after the fact, or after a mistake, well, you're not that smart because you're young. No, we need to take a proactive stance in providing mentorship and companionship, trying to teach people a better way. When I started doing research on some of the gang statistics, I came across this map of our city. And the darker sections are the sections of the city where the neighborhoods are considered more dangerous. The lighter sections are considered safer. And as I was looking at that, if you know where our church is located, down on the south end of town, you know, we're in a very nice, affluent, safe area. We don't need to make the mistake of thinking that just because we can afford to give ourselves a comfortable life, that we're therefore not accountable for reaching out to those who are weaker than us, to those who are vulnerable and don't have those good figures in their lives. I wanted to take just a moment to talk about how this has been important to us as a church family, because as I throw this out there, it is not the case that we're doing nothing. And in fact, I think we've got a number of our people involved in some really good efforts. And so not an exhaustive list. I wanted to highlight a few things very quickly that we have some people involved in. There are some local pregnancy care centers. I know Les Maloney volunteers every single Monday offering counseling for people who didn't expect they were going to become fathers, who were suddenly in a crisis pregnancy situation and going, I don't really know how to be a dad. I know that's something that Les has been involved in, offering classes and counseling for people who have ended up with unexpected pregnancies. I've really appreciated Ridge Hammond's charity, the Help Charity. They focus on helping younger people who've maybe not had a lot of positive role models to get to go and see what real careers can be like. So maybe they could imagine a better path for themselves. That's been something that's great. James Gurley has been highly involved, and in fact, our congregation has partnered some with a charity called Youth Odyssey. They specifically look for kids who really would be at risk for getting themselves in some bad situations, and then they provide them with life skills. They coach them, they teach them, they do some different types of adventurous programming, and they've had a great success rate at helping keep people, young people especially, away from those dangerous paths. Something that's become a wonderful ministry for our own church in the last couple of years is called Care Portal. Joe Alley is our main contact for Care Portal, but I just get great news out of Care Portal all the time. The way this works is that caseworkers look for situations where children might be at risk for getting taken away from their parents, but it's the case that they are good parents. They're just struggling financially. So they let us know about real needs, and they send an email out. Joe gets the email, then Joe sends an email to everyone here who's on the list. And you guys have been responding wonderfully to this. I bumped into the director of Care Portal about 3 weeks ago, and he let me know that we're doing a whole lot more than his own congregation, who is theoretically kind of heading up the effort. He says King's Crossing has really distinguished ourselves among the city for all the ways that we have been stepping up to try and show compassion for those who are in these vulnerable circumstances. Of course, couldn't help but talk about our prison ministry and all that Buck and so many of you have accomplished over the years, that when a child does grow up and choose a path that's less desirable for themselves, that we're not just going to throw them away, but instead we're going to see what, with God's help, we could redeem in their lives, that we could teach them some better life skills. Hopefully all of you get the Christian Chronicle. It's a great Church of Christ newspaper. If you don't get it, let me know. We're happy to get you on that mailing list for it. But Buck had a great article in there just a few weeks ago talking about all the work that our prison ministry has done. So on this issue of reaching out to younger people, trying to help them along, there's many things I think I can commend us for as a congregation. And of course, even as I make this list, I'm leaving off all the teachers, aren't I? All our teachers and educators and so many of you who are actively working and loving young people, helping them along. But the clear message in this passage is that God did not just bless us with our resources so that we could sit back and eat and drink and be merry. But that God has given us the things that we have so that we can be good stewards of what we've been blessed with, that we would care for those who are weaker, those who have fewer opportunities, that we do what we can. Now, if people fail to listen to the message, if people fail to listen to the word, to some degree that's on them. But if we fail to ever make the effort to teach in the first place, that's on us, isn't it? We have to do the things that we can to reach out to those who need a better path. It seems to me that if I could summarize a lot of this passage we've looked at in Proverbs, it would say something like this: what you've done to or for others, you've also done to or for yourself. It's a positive or a negative thing. I can't help but imagine Jesus is drawing on this passage somewhat as he talks about the golden rule. He makes it a very proactive thing. Go ahead and be doing for others what you wish someone would do for you. So this is a double-edged passage. If you seek to harm, if you seek to rob, if you seek to make shortcuts, to lie, to cheat, to steal, to rip people off, he says, in the end, you're going to be your own worst victim for the things that you've done. You're ultimately harming yourself when you try to harm another person or take advantage of them. But on the positive side of that, when we go out and we bless others, doesn't that have a way of coming back to you? Have you had some of those experiences in your life where you just made that extra little effort to show some kindness to someone who needed it, and then later on down the road, you'd completely forgotten about it, but someone reminded you that, it might have been insignificant to you, but it wasn't insignificant to them. Yours might have been the very encouragement that made a huge difference in a person's life and the path that they were choosing for themselves. What we're doing to or for others, we are also somewhat doing to or for ourselves. And so when we choose to be people who give encouragement and companionship and wisdom, when we refresh the lives of others, we trust that in the times we're needing it, God will also send us times of encouragement and refreshing. This morning, if there's some way that you need to respond to this message, if you're needing to be more deliberate in your life about choosing the path that belongs to God, choosing the way that leads to God, if there's something we could do to help you along that path and you'd like to talk to us about that, we would invite you to come forward as together we stand and sing this song.